So, now we get on to your interview of Mr. Harry Jowsey. Now, I read some of the comments under Harry Jowsey, and one woman, I think, her name is the Parker Lady 894. And she was very, very nice about Harry. Quoting her comment, "It's not your fault. Social expectations don't make anyone happy. But I can see the pain in your eyes. You don't have to always laugh. I also saw the pain in Harry's eyes. I felt that Harry was borderline mental issues. If you listen to him talk and his body language, I mean, it's almost manic. I feel really scared for him. And it seems like he feels really scared for himself. So, the part that really ticked me off, Dr. Mike, is when you started talking about childhood trauma. I mean, you gotta be kidding. You can get away with your shit talking about all these other topics on your hundreds of YouTube videos. I don't even know how you get time to do all that. When do you do your medical practice? I mean, what are you, 32, 34 years old? You've lived a charmed life, just like Harry Jowsey. He just a white boy that's never worked in his life. No wonder he doesn't know where he's going, where he's coming from. What's his interaction with people? What did he do, a TV show? But he won some marriage thing or whatever it was? I mean, what marriage works today anyway, Harry? My sister's been married for 47 years, I think. They've had their ups and downs. I've been married twice, divorced twice. Why didn't you guys explore marriage? Many people in the world, still millions, get married by arrangement. Do they work better than so-called falling in love, whatever that means? And how do you know you'll be in love forever anyway? Arranged marriages, I don't know, there's more bad points than good points. I thought I was in love a few times, but doesn't work like that, Harry. So, mental health. I don't get you, Dr. Mike. How can you talk about mental health? You have had zero experience personally about mental health. You're not a family psychologist, a family doctor. Sorry, you are a family doctor. You're not a family therapist. You're not a psychologist. You're not a psychiatrist. So what the hell are you? to talk about things like this? What are you giving? False hope? I mean, Harry's reaction when you said, oh, you know, you can get a pain and it's caused by childhood trauma. And he goes, wow, what a lot of shit. Childhood trauma? Who has resolved it? Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate, talks about it a lot. I just listened to his podcast again. I'm going to read from that podcast. Because if trauma was what happened to me when I was a year old, I'm 77 and I'm 76 years too late. But if trauma is a wound that I sustained, it can be healed at any time. I don't think so. From my limited experience in childhood trauma, first of all, my brother's a schizophrenic, 50 years. I've been around him for 50 years. What caused that? Nobody knows. Can they cure that? No. If you catch it early enough, there is a possibility that you can overcome schizophrenia. The only thing that's changed in 50 years of my reading and talking to his doctors is that the drugs have changed. That's it. It's like cancer. How close are they to curing cancer? All these idiots on these YouTubers, TikTok, whatever, Instagram. Oh, I can cure all cancers. Even Dr. Gundry. Oh, cure cancer. Most cancers are a lifestyle, caused by a lifestyle, environment. But they also can be caused by childhood trauma. My best friend, who was acutely aware of his childhood trauma, his parents used to beat him up. Ask Sean Strickland what childhood trauma really is. You guys, Mike and Harry, what the hell do you know about childhood trauma to that degree? That being said, everybody has childhood trauma. Everyone on this planet. But how do you resolve it? My unhappiness in my early 20s, even after I graduated from the best university in Australia, I worked for 2 years and was incredibly unhappy. And then I bumped into a guy who gave me a book, and it was called The Primal Scream by Arthur Yanov. So I saved my money and went to LA and did the course. Therapy. And it really, really helped me. But in my opinion, you never get rid of childhood trauma. There's no resolution to childhood trauma. It's how well you cope with it. And you cope with it the best the more you're aware of it. But your idea that if you have a pain somewhere and you can't find a medical reason for it, it must be childhood trauma. And your discussion, I have it here, I left a message under your podcast about with I forgot his name, the other doctor that criticized you about that you shouldn't be diagnosing back pain. I don't know if you read my comment. It was 2 days ago. But I'm going to read it to you. Dr. Mike, I have to agree with the other surgeon, but his critique is misplaced. you clearly stated that you have to do a proper workup to make sure it is not anatomical. This is where he gets lost, that you did not check with other professionals. I am sure you do. Where you are not acting in good faith nor professionalism is if you cannot find a cause of this problem that is an anatomical condition and all other experts cannot, then it may be caused by early childhood trauma. But then the patient should consult a therapist of some sort. You are not, as I said, you are not a family therapist, nor a psychologist, nor a psychiatrist. How can you start consulting like one? And then you say, you said in your interview to your patient, not Harry, do you want to talk about it? This is gaslighting. What the hell do you know about childhood trauma and how to resolve it? That's all you're saying is, oh, you remembered something bad in your early childhood. Well, let's talk about it. How different is that from you talking to Harry in that podcast? How different is that from talking to your friends going out for a drink? So they tell you about it. Then how do you resolve it? How do you make the guy forget about it? Do you make him forget about it? What happens after he walks out of your consultation? He's the same guy. Nothing changed. You said, do you want to try and talk about that? We do it. And it works a lot. What works? I'm sorry, but are you an idiot? What research did you do about childhood trauma to think you can say, and it works a lot? Did you follow up? Did he behave and do everything he'd been doing 1 day later, 2 days later? I mean, he might as well just take LSD. Get much more connected to his young self. I don't get you, Mike. I'm sorry. Dr. Gabor goes on. As I said earlier, wounds can be healed at any time. How? How do you heal something that happened 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago? You can't get rid of it. It's there. It's there forever. We go through, experience a lot of that pain at different times in our lives. And most people deal with it through emotional releases. Of course, the safest one is simply crying. The ugly one is getting into a fight or road rage and killing someone, because we couldn't control some of that pain that comes up when you simply get angry. Going back to Dr. Mate. And if you look at the essence of trauma, it is a disconnection from the self. Well, I don't think so. It's all about connection to the self. And so when you didn't experience affirmation and love, you were just disconnected from yourself. That's all. So that self-affirmation, that love, that can be reconnected with because it was never lost. It was just covered up by this wound and this scar. And as he says in the next line, so airy-fairy as it may sound, I'm sorry, it is airy-fairy because there's no resolution. It's not a cut in your arm that you can heal. You don't have a broken leg that you can reset. The childhood trauma is permanent. I don't know if a guy like Sean Strickland has gone to do therapy, but ask someone like Woody Allen. What he said after 20, 30 years of therapy, week after week after week. I'm paraphrasing, but the article I read, he said, I'm just the same guy. I could have saved myself a fortune. And I'm sure he saw some of the best either psychologists or psychiatrists in New York City. So, Dr. Mike, wow, you must have resolved it for these guys hanging out in your doctor's office talking about their childhood pain. Going back to Mate, the work is really to reconnect with one's true self and to heal the wound. And that can be done for anybody who opens themselves to it. It can't be done for people who don't realize they're wounded. We all know we're wounded if you want to accept that fact. But the wound is so deep, most people can't even get to it, even if you're aware of it. And then he goes on about being distracted in life, you don't have quiet times, so therefore you can't connect to that inner self. But going back a bit, he did say, so that self-affirmation, that love. Parents tell you, I'm doing this for you because I love you, and then beat the shit out of you. I'm sorry, that's not love. But love is the key. What children need, and the pain I believe they suffer when they're young, is because they don't get the right love from their parents. I did want to add in this editing that I am a huge fan of Gabor Mate. I saw him give a lecture 25 years ago in LA. I bought his book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. I remember it very well. He's a great man. He fought the Canadian government 3 times to the High Court. They wanted to shut down his safe injecting rooms in Vancouver. He spent over 20 years of his practice consulting and working with drug addicts, and he's written 5 or so books. He concluded, that childhood trauma is the main reason behind drug addiction. And it's not the drug, it's the environment. An example of this is during the Vietnam War, many of the US soldiers used to get totally drugged out on cocaine that was brought in by the government. And they'd sit around being totally stoned, smoking dope and doing cocaine. That's how they dealt with the stress. The PTSD among any war veteran is difficult to deal with and understand. But the fear of living in a jungle, like Vietnam, almost never seeing the enemy and getting shot at all the time must be horrifying. When these soldiers came back from Vietnam, they were not addicts anymore. But all these studies got lost on everybody, especially the great Ronald Reagan. I can't tell you how much I hate that guy. For a few reasons. One is, when he was governor of California in the late 60s, he closed all the psychiatric hospitals, and many other states followed. You know, he was the bootstrap guy. All your problems are your own fault. Just get out there and make it work. And he promised he'd build, thousands of halfway houses or halfway buildings, whatever. And guess what? None were built. The beginning of homelessness in California, the jail population skyrocketed. And even today, there are so many people in prison with mental health problems. Going back to Mr. Reagan, that's what I call the dumbing down of America era. Excuse me. He was the one that fired all the traffic controllers in 82 or 83. Man, what a lucky son of a bitch. Nobody died because they wanted better working conditions and more money. Yet, his philosophy on defeating communism, the Cold War, was to outspend the Russians. He spent billions of dollars on so many areas that were a complete waste of time. And to give you one example, the classic one, it was called Star Wars. They were going to build this massive electronic umbrella over the US, so no IBMs could infiltrate it. They would get blasted in the upper atmosphere before they got to America. It was a complete lie. All the experts said it was a complete lie, but he spent millions and billions of dollars. A hot air balloon confused it. Unbelievable guy. Second part, let alone the 100 reasons I hate Ronald Reagan, is that under his government, they started to introduce the drug wars. Guess who introduced crack cocaine into South Central LA in the 80s? During Ronald Reagan's government. The guy was if you listen to any of his speeches, in my opinion, he never told the truth, anytime, anywhere. He was the folksy guy, fireside chat guy. Drug wars. Psst, what a joke. And then he got all those people hooked on crack cocaine. Well, during his tenure anyway, brought in by the CIA. How could he not know? So, going to relate that to you, Dr. Mike. But I've forgotten how. So, anyway, how it relates to you, Dr. Mike, is that, as I mentioned, it's the gullibility of your audience. Ronald Reagan was an ex-actor, and he worked out, after he stopped acting, what people wanted to hear and the image they wanted to see in their leaders. Of course, you're not the same, but you are relatively quite young, you're handsome, extremely well educated. So people think, for all these reasons, you're quite eloquent, of course, like you know what you're saying, and you believe it, and it's true. The problem is, as with Ronald Reagan, it's all a lie. Look it up, Mike, and you'll see. The great Ronald Reagan, who began the dumbing down of America. And I grew up living in fear. That is my pain. I don't think my father ever hit me, but he was such a powerful, strong man that if he did hit me, he knew he'd probably definitely break some bones and a high chance it would have killed me. So, going back to Mr. Harry Jowsey. You guys are just having a barroom talk. There's nothing really therapeutic between your conversations. Well, why didn't you give him a session while you were talking to him during the podcast? Both of you had such a privileged white life. But you got, I mean, Harry, I hope he, what can I say, gets help. You, Dr. Mike, I think you need to stop acting like you know everything about so many things. I'm an expert in 3 fields. None of them are psychology, psychiatry, medical. But I do know what's worked for me. I do know the foods that work for me. I do know the exercises that work for me. I've watched a lot of YouTubers on longevity. And I've done therapy on myself and went to do therapy. Let me see what else I want to talk about. Physical ailments. I love the example you gave about the elbow. I mean, Mike, I'm sorry. I mean, it's really sounded like the elbow example you gave is either psychosomatic or it's just plain stress. He's stressed at work, his elbow hurts, he goes home on the weekend, has a good time, hangs out with his buddies, his wife, his kids, and the pain goes away. I mean, isn't that classic stress-related pain? From my experience and all the men and women I met at the Primal Institute in Los Angeles, and they all went there to resolve childhood trauma. That's what the Institute's about. So your idea that if you have a pain in your body, of course, you didn't say all pain in your body that can't be resolved. I joke, but look at all the Dr. House TV episodes. How many of those people went to see a doctor and only a crazy nut like Dr. House could resolve their pain or their medical condition? I see a similar thing in you, Dr. Mike. Stay with what you know, because You're just playing to your audience, just like you critique Dr. Gundry, and he's playing to his audience. And he's just giving sound bites so he can get clicks. Like apples are bad for you. I mean, only a moron would believe that. But today, in our society, guess what? People are morons. The dumbing down of America. I'm sure you've heard that expression. Well, your audience can't be too bright, Mike. I've read a lot of the comments. How much they love you. But your advice is full of what? Hot air. It's not based on anything. Everything you said in the beginning of the Dr. Gundry and Dr. Bellardo, it's all about you. Dude, get a life and stop giving advice. Good day to you all.